Welcome to Cover Your SaaS. Today we're going to do a solution showcase on our Veeam Data Cloud, showing some of the newer security features, what's existing in the console today, and just a touch more. To start off with, my name is Corinne Bassett. I'm a technologist here at Veeam Software. I'm also a Microsoft MVP. Let's hop in here and take a high-level overview of what we're going to go through today. So first of all, we do have some new features coming out, and I will tease those towards the end of the presentation. We also are going to take a look at what's the landscape look like today in any type of SaaS environment, especially in the Microsoft 365 platform. And additionally, we always want to make this the most simplistic process as possible. So we'll be taking a look at the interface firsthand to see how you configure jobs, do restores, and some of the nifty compare features on hand. So if you're not already familiar with Veeam itself, we are a data protection and resiliency company. We do everything from protecting your data, gaining insights and intelligence into that backup process, and we care really deeply about the portability behind the scenes. And you really see that within the restore operations and the data security side of the company. Now, let's set the landscape for the Microsoft 365 and Entra ID landscape as a whole. Now, announced here very recently, Microsoft 365 environment is attacked over 600 million times every single day. And that number just keeps increasing. And we got these numbers directly from Microsoft at a public announcement. So we know even from behind the scenes, they're seeing the load and the amount of attacks that are happening just to that ecosystem due to the sheer popularity of that platform. Next is there are over 2 billion new files added every day in the Microsoft 365 platform. I know I contribute heavily to that number itself, but we have lots of other things generating files and statistics and everything across the board, and especially in the generative AI world that we live in and using Copilot and other adaptive AIs in the ecosystem. Now, due to different types of compromises and breaches, some of the conversations that come up is what is really compromised in these kinds of attacks? And most of the time, it comes down to identity. Yes, we know the traditional like phishing attacks and things like that, but identity really is the core of your infrastructure. Now, why should you care anything about what we say? Well, we protect a ton of users, actually over 23.5 million users, and this is just climbing as the year ends here, protected within our platform. We are, by statistics and analyst reviews, the #1 deployed protection system in the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, even when we come up against the native providers and third-party competitors. Now, what we're really going to be going into today is the Veeam Data Platform. The Veeam Data Platform allows us to give you a easy way into protecting this ecosystem. A lot of conversations originally happened around, okay, we have all of this data in a big footprint in the Microsoft 365 SharePoint and OneDrive data entities. Coming back down onto an on-premises environment so that you get a compliance level copy of that data is sometimes unheard of when we're talking about terabytes and larger types of ecosystems. And this really gives you that platform that gives you first level security. So you don't have to worry about, is this secure? Am I doing the right thing here? We're going to give you everything by default. And this is the expanded view. So we have all of our original slide that I was showing you for the Veeam protection suite as a whole. But doubling down on the Veeam Data Cloud side, we have Microsoft 365, Entra ID, Azure, and Salesforce. These are all the SaaS applications and IaaS applications that we have protected currently. We do have explorations and have announced futures on all of these coming down the line. So we're rapidly expanding this platform. And here on the right-hand side, I'm just going to mention that we have the Veeam Data Vault. Veeam Data Vault is our backup storage solution to a secure way to offload and offsite any of your backups into a secure data entity that may be protected outside of your current privilege zone. That way you're getting that extra resiliency built in. All of this has service level immutability. There's default encryption on the back end, and we even offer a bring your own key policy, which we'll double click on a little later in this presentation. So really, we're going to be talking about the Enter ID and Microsoft 365 platform, but we all know that we run into a much bigger ecosystem. When it comes to your identity management, really, this is the bleeding heart of your organization. You can't log into any of your resources. Many of your single sign-on metrics are backed by this entity. Knowing what's in there, knowing that's protected, and being able to quickly see those changes and restore them is critical. Also talking into conditional access policies and making sure that you have a single sign-on area. This is all lives in your Enter ID, but gives you back and access to your Microsoft 365 business critical data. So what does this look like in the grand scheme of a shared responsibility? A shared responsibility model is just a representation of what you are responsible for in a relationship with any cloud provider out there and what the cloud provider is responsible for any of those relationships and everything in between. We'll be mostly covering the SaaS side because there's a little bit of a misconception that we're helping break here where, yes, you've given up control. You said, Microsoft, you're going to protect this, and that's fine. You don't have to worry about bit rot and some of those other on-premises problems. But as Microsoft duplicates on the back end, anything that comes in through the front door, say through a valid authentication process, so maybe an admin accidentally changing a setting, or malicious user compromises someone legitimate in your company and comes through that front door, any damage that has occurred in that way is the responsibility of the end user. And in some cases, if you haven't had protection zones around this or other compliance around this, you may be left without your data at the end of the day. And that's really where we step in with all of the backup providers out there. And especially with the Veeam Data Cloud, we're able to protect that data and offer an additional privilege zone for the identity access method. So even if someone's able to breach the front door of your Microsoft 365 zone, we've created an extra level that you can move over to, so you're not breaching the entire organization in these kind of attacks. And we really feel like there's a ground level, and then there's a build-up, and then there is the entire roof that covers everything. And I'm going to build this out for you a little. So let's start the first pillar, business continuity. Now, when it comes to business continuity inside the Microsoft 365 platform, if a server goes down tomorrow and the platform's completely inaccessible for, say, minutes or hours, you're not going to be able to operate, especially if you have critical data living there. So what you need to have is a solution that allows you to access, not necessarily restore back to the original environment, but access the critical data until the other side is online. And that's when we come into what is your preparedness for your disaster types and plans. Because disaster in the cloud isn't the same as disaster on-prem, because disaster on-prem, we're thinking, how fast can we get these servers back online? How fast can we get the data back to the original environment? Which in reality, disaster recovery, when it comes to large scale into the cloud, is getting access to your data now and let us restore what we need to back into the cloud over time, which really plays into this business continuity plan. And identity sits right in between both of these pillars, and it all sits on the foundation of security. Security is going to be the hot topic today and probably your job security for the future. So things like multi-factor authentication, making sure that your data is protected, those are all built in by default within the platform. We don't even let you say to our Veeam Data Vault, our storage side, we don't let you send data up there that's A, not encrypted, and B, that doesn't have a proper authentication method set up and encryption on that side. And this really comes around to the broader perspective of how do I build resiliency and a cloud first and a cloud forward and even AI forward infrastructure. And that's where we come into two different types of backup. So we have what we call more of that traditional style backup, which is using the export AIs from the infrastructure in the Microsoft 365 platform. So we're talking about Graph API, what used to be the EWS and SPO APIs. Those things that actually export data and allow us to import that same data back into that environment. There are some problems with that. So whenever you're exporting and importing data into a platform, there's always going to be some type of limiter on, say, network connection and what I like to call physics, getting data from point A to point B. This is for a myriad of reasons, from looking at your network connections to looking at the Microsoft platform itself, saying, hey, we're only going to ingest so much data. That way we can keep availability across the board to all the other users. That's when we stepped into this paired generation of the Microsoft Backup Storage API. This Backup Storage API actually lives in the Microsoft ecosystem, and what they do is they allow you to have a mirror or a shadow copy of that data in the Microsoft 365 backbone. That way, whenever you need to do like a large scale type of restoration process, you're able to whole scale and bulk restore from that storage entity that lives on the backbone back into a production state. What this really amounts to, traditional backup allowed you to maybe restore terabytes of data or a couple terabytes of data within a day. This other process where you can do bulk restore items allows you to do terabytes of data within an hour, which is a huge advantage, especially if you have a large scale type of attack. But it really comes down to, which should I use? And in the end, many cases, you're going to want both options in your environment. And it really does depend on what your disaster preparation and readiness is going to look like in these situations and what you expect to have available in these situations. The drawbacks in some cases is when you're looking at what we call the Flex, which is the Microsoft side of this equation doing export APIs, you're going to get a lot more granularity and control over individual items, emails, attachments, exports, all the way across the board. When we're looking at the Express, which is the Microsoft backup storage side of the equation, then we're going to be looking at bulk mass restores of entire SharePoint sites, which contain tons and tons of data. You really need the best of both worlds in order to make sure that you're getting both for full business continuity. So there's a couple of key takeaways here, and it's really about how exposed am I and what is the likelihood of exposure? And these are just a couple of articles from large vendors talking about how many passwords have ever been exfiltrated from organizations, password reuse, password health, you name it, the identity is here. That being said, there's large entities that even just comb through the dark web and the dark places, like haveibeenpwned.com goes through and allows you to hash check how many times your password has been compromised based off the hash of that password in other enterprises. And this will really help you have a little bit more of a health situation when it comes to your protection. What you really need to do is, how do I fill these gaps? Because it's not a matter of if this is going to happen, it's when am I going to get compromised? And it's always the silliest things that tend to get overlooked. So let's take a look at what's at stake now that we know that we do have to prepare for this regardless of how protected we are. What happens if this does happen? What's going to occur? What kind of identity is going to be lost? What are my most potential victims in these scenarios? Sometimes it's your admins. Your admins are the keys and the gateway to your entire organization. But on the flip side, you could be looking at maybe finance. Finance is money in the organization, and depending on protocols that are in place, there could be a large exfiltration of funds within the company, which could impact business and highly disrupt reputation out in the industry. So let's take a look at what we have in the foundations when native tools aren't enough, and say this across the Microsoft 365 platform, the Enter ID side. We can talk about Azure and Salesforce. I can give you a list of organizations that didn't have these extra steps in process, and had silly misconfigurations. For an example, let's take the Microsoft 365 platform. There are compliance holds on the amount of time that messages live in your infrastructure inside of Microsoft Teams. Well, some policies come through, or even some changes on the way settings affect the Microsoft 365 platform change in the admin center. And there was a very large organization out there that changed their Microsoft Teams message retention to be 7 days. There was a misconception about the way that that was going to affect the organization. And really overnight, there was a ton of data that just got deleted from the entire Microsoft Teams environment. They then proceeded to go back to the Microsoft organization saying, hey, we really do need this. We're missing files, we're missing purchase orders, we're missing a lot of data here. Are you able to provide that back? And unfortunately, in this kind of situation, since they didn't have their additional copy of that data from the ecosystem, Microsoft was unable to provide that back because it's also gone from their servers. It's not like every entity has a second stage recycling bin on the Microsoft 365 side. So let's get into a little bit more and talk about the next generation of what does this look like. Yes, we're talking about backup, but there's a lot more that we're doing within this platform. And first of all is going to be the advanced threat protection, which we'll take a little bit of demo on here in a bit. But this advanced threat protection allows us to detect anomalies and things in your environment that are very specific towards the users and entities in the organization, so that we can detect changes not based off of thresholds, but based off of individual metrics on those users. Next is the Veeam Intelligence. This is what I like to call your admin sidekick. So we have something within our portal where you can ask it questions, get feedback on best practices, documentation, how-tos, you name it. It's going to give you some information on how to do your job better. So even if it's not intuitive enough to start with, you can find exactly what you need at the end of the day. This is constantly evolving. I like also saying around the accessibility and language barriers. You can ask for any documentation and process back from this in a native language so that it's accessible, especially if you're a multi-region type of organization. We talked about the bring your own key. We offer this. This is actually one of the newest features that we've deployed within the portal, and it allows you to say, hey, I want to hold the keys to the kingdom. I want to hold the key that is going to allow any type of decryption and the encryption of that data. That way that no one from the Veeam side can get to it, no one from an external side can get to it unless they possess that key, which adds a security layer. In some cases, it also helps with compliance, such as like GDPR, where you can't store data in a region where it's accessible by that region. But if your key is held in a primary region that is allowed, there's some workarounds that you're able to build in here. And it runs right off the Microsoft backbone. So we're integrated with the platform, and it allows you to use things like Azure Key Vault so that you don't have to worry about risking losing that key from just some random self-user generated key. We use the identity principles within the Entra ID side so that you make sure that you have the proper scope is configured here. And we make it just as easy as inputting it as part of the onboarding process. Now, we talked a lot about this product. I actually want to head on over and take a look at it itself, and we'll head right over here. So this is the Microsoft 365 platform as it exists today. You can see all of the applications are simply available within this portal. There's just a bunch of buttons. I've configured multiple Enter ID, like tenants here. I can see I have multiple tenants. We have a nice dashboard. This dashboard is what I like to call your coffee window. You come in, you're sipping your coffee, and you can see immediately, okay, everything seems to be on board with Microsoft 365 and Enter ID, but maybe I need to double click on the Salesforce to see if there's something there that I need to take a look at. If you're not responsible for all these data entities, you can scope down the work to just the entities that you're in charge of, as well as just the tenants that you're in charge of. That way you get a more personalized experience to whatever your job and your role scope is. Activities is another great stop in your search into the console. So if you want to see if there's maybe a bunch of restores happening, or you want to do a quick audit of who's using this portal and who is not using this portal, you can quickly do that through just a couple of key sets of filters, say actors and the workload type, and you can see exactly who's executing restores and backups and accessing resources on the Enter ID portal. Let's take a look at what it takes to make a job. It's very simple to add a tenant. You simply click on add a tenant. It'll help you name that tenant, and we'll just give it a name here. You get a device logon code. This device logon code, as long as you have the proper permissions, say an administrator account, it'll deploy the application with you, and that's it. It takes just a little bit longer after that to deploy the resources automatically on the back end. We load balance, we scale, we deploy the proxies, whatever needs to happen. And this is what it looks like after you've deployed in the infrastructure. You get this personalized view of just a single tenant. You can create as many backup policies as make sense to your organization. We were talking about the differences between Express and Flex. So these Flex processes allows you to have more granular control over the restore operations that you have available to you. And of course, this flexibility has an Express edition, so you can say, hey, I want to be able to do bulk restores on either my SharePoint or OneDrive, and you have control of assigning that here. Now, the Restore portal is also super simple. You have your different options here at the top for the application supported within that tenant and that workload support. Or if you do need to do a bulk operations, you can upload files if you have a list of users or what you need to select in the situation. And all of them are super easy. It's basically a file explorer where you path down through exactly what you need. You don't need to be an application expert to understand this. One of my favorite features within this portal, I'm going to double click on inside of the Enter ID side, and this is going to be with our Compare Restore. This Compare Restore allows us to select a user and compare this restore point. Now, when I say compare this restore point, I have a couple of options. I can either compare this restore point to the production data as it exists today, so I can see from this restore point to production what's changed in an easy view. Or I can flip side compare two restore points and see what maybe has changed between these two different points in time. And I've loaded one up here for the groups, and what it's able to do is see not just the changed items, but the items that have not changed. And you can get really granular and see these here. Next, I want to see if I can show you something behind the scenes here. This one's in our development environment. We'll double click on a couple of the workloads after we get logged on here. I got a bit of a cookie issue, so we'll let it follow through the logon process again. Now, this again is a little bit behind the scenes, but everything that's in this environment here is pretty much right around the corner for us. And what I really wanted to get into on this portal is going to be our Veeam Intelligence. Now, the Veeam Intelligence has a couple of options already pre-built here in prompting, and I'm going to let it generate with whatever it wants right now, but these are the clean, pretty result answers. What I also want to show you is, can you show me my 10? It's under Microsoft 365 in a chart. So they're going to ask it to see if it can do something. And even if it doesn't have the ability to do that, it'll give you the ability to help you find how to do those in the end. And we'll hop back over into our demo and slides. We'll go back to the environment here in just a moment, but I wanted to tee up something really cool and a technology that I am super excited about. So we are releasing, I want to say imminently, we don't have it out today, but I'm going to show you a preview about exactly what's coming. And this is going to be our threat detection. And what does it mean to have threat detection in today's architecture? Well, we really have to get into advanced algorithms, and tailored type of results to be able to detect the two major types of attacks out there. One of them is what we call the fast attack. This fast attack means that things are changing overnight, like minute by minute. You can watch the terabytes like melt away inside of your environment. It's very aggressive. It may be pivoting through multiple credentials and compromising changes like some titles and anything on that scale. So those are large attacks. Those are pretty well, you're probably getting a call from your user before anything in your environment is picking up and detecting and doing anything about it. The other side is what I like to call the extended attack. Now, this extended attack will take little bits and pieces over time, and we end up building a trend. Your work's pretty static. Even when you're talking about on a quarterly basis, by the end of the quarter, you pretty much have a footprint of what that person looks like over 90 days. Now, if something kind of pivots directly from there where the person is maybe in finance and all of a sudden they start trying to search and get into as many HR documentations as they can, that could be either an insider threat or a bad actor that's compromised those credentials. This is what we call more of the extended attack, where they're looking, they're changing, they're trying to put some backdoors in for themselves. And that's what we're facing in the landscape today. And we have our ransomware detection service that is coming out, and it really has these different pillars to help predict and work with that technology, making sure that we're catching the modern landscape of attack. So the personalized detection I was talking about, it's not just for the entire user as a whole. We're talking about every application underneath of that user having its own threat detection profile. So their email, their SharePoint, their OneDrive, their Teams, all of those are going to have their own detection profile, meaning that it's very scoped and tailored to the data entity. Next is we have a bunch of different scores and metrics and things that we look at to see how that data changes to make sure that the architecture of that data and the structure of that data is exactly what it's supposed to be. And when it deviates, let you know immediately so you're able to decide what type of action that you need to take. The next is really more of a wider expanding conversation. So we're talking about wide scale ransomware attacks. There's probably going to be a bunch of bells going off. Well, we hope there's a lot of bells going off with a myriad of other detection engines, but we like to pride ourselves on being one of the widest detection ranges for ransomware and different kinds of ransomware out there. We've seen in the news over the last couple of years a lot of those big actors being taken down, but I like to explain this to anyone out there is it's like if you went over to a puddle and you stomped your foot down, almost immediately after you got a whole wish of water coming back into that puddle and flooding that market with new types of attacks. And it's just a never-ending battle, and you really have to protect yourself with the right tools. And the last is this learns and adapts to your environment on its own. It's not something that you have to feed metrics to. You don't have to prime this model. It primes itself because it knows what type of data and it's built for this kind of data in that ecosystem. And that's really coming into the anomaly detection, our unified threat center, which we'll take a look at, and the real-time protection landscape that's coming down the line. For the underlying technology and those that want to get a little nerdy on this side, we actually have a proprietary, actually two proprietary technologies that we've algorithmically put into the background in order to have a detection of this data change in the environment. So as you can see within these charts, we have a spattering of what the data looks like when it's getting into its healthy state and we're checking what's going on with that data. Below, what you see in the red is any type of ransomware attack, or in this case, bad rabbit ransomware hit this environment. We're able to automatically see how the profile of that data completely changed, and the algorithm's able to pick that up for us in the side. And let's see if we can get into the lab environment to get a first-hand look at what is happening and what we're able to see now. And if you notice, this new section has a threats side. This threat's going to have a malware threats and ransomware threats. There's definitely more coming, so just hold on, wait. We have a lot coming down the line. So let's take a look at what this is in the console. We can see that it detected 10 files during this backup section that have indicators of malware. And we can see these all kind of came through the same location. We could definitely take this as feedback, go to that site, make sure something funny is not happening, and then help protect it from there. Next is our ransomware threat side. Now, this is interesting because what it'll do during a ransomware attack is we'll take a random generation of the files. We check every file during the backup, but when we provide you, we will to a sample of that file so you can get a pretty good idea. Oh, well, this SharePoint site and site 1 seems to be my highly compromised area. I know that I can scope and kind of double down my efforts to that side. So let's go ahead and wrap up here. Before the end of the year, we do have a deal out there, and you can see both of the bundles here. This is billed per user monthly, but billed as annual. So you can do the math on that. It's an incredible deal. I would hop on this if you're even thinking about trying to close before the end of the year. I want to thank everyone for spending some time with me today. There were a bunch of resources that were provided as the invite to this webinar. We will also be sending some follow-ups to you guys if you have any questions. I'll be happy to try to get back to you through that method. Thank you.